On the morning of July 8, 2025, something changed inside Mount Rainier. Starting at 1:29 a.m., a cascade of tiny earthquakes began firing beneath the summit of the tallest volcano in the Pacific. Northwest? Not one, not a dozen, thousands. Over the next 7 weeks, monitoring stations recorded more than 1,350 locatable earthquakes and an estimated 8,800 total seismic events, the largest earthquake swarm ever documented at this volcano in more than 3 decades of modern monitoring. The earthquakes were too small to feel at the surface. Not a single one was strong enough to rattle a window or shake a shelf, but to the scientists watching, the data stream in. From instruments buried across the mountain, the pattern was unmistakable. Something inside the volcano had shifted, and the reason that matters has nothing to do with whether Mount Rainier is about to erupt. It has to do with what makes this particular volcano the most dangerous in the United States, even when it is perfectly quiet. The swarm began without preamble. At 1:29 a.m. Pacific Time on July 8th, seismometers operated by the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network picked up the first event. Within hours, earthquakes were firing at a rate of 41 located events per. The activity was concentrated between 1.5 and 4 miles beneath the summit, clustered tightly in a zone directly above the volcano's magma chamber. The largest single event was a magnitude 2.4 on July 11th. Most were far smaller, registering below magnitude 1. They were too faint to be felt by anyone on the mountain, let alone in the towns below. Over the following days, the rate gradually declined, from dozens per hour to a handful per day. By August 25th, activity had decayed to fewer than 1 located event per day, and the USGS Cascades Volcano Observatory formally declared that seismicity had returned to typical background levels. Mount Rainier normally averages about 9 to 10 located earthquakes per month. The July swarm produced more than that every hour at its peak. Scientists at the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network applied a technique called template matching, which uses the waveform signatures of known earthquakes to detect smaller events that fall below the standard detection threshold. That analysis identified 48 distinct repeating earthquake families and roughly 8,800 individual events across the full duration of the swarm. In parallel, USGS gas specialists partnered with the National Park Service for a helicopter survey over the summit. Flying directly above the fumaroles, the small steam vents in the east and west summit craters, they measured the composition and emission rates of volcanic gases using sensitive airborne instruments. The results showed no significant change from previous surveys. Carbon dioxide levels near the vents were mildly elevated, consistent with known hydrothermal activity, but critically, there was no spike in sulfur dioxide, the gas most closely associated with fresh magma moving toward the surface. The volcano's geodetic network, a grid of GPS stations that measures ground deformation with millimeter precision, recorded no inflation or deflation during the swarm. No ground swelling, no tilting, no outward expansion of the kind that would indicate magma rising into a shallow reservoir. The USGS kept Mount Rainier's alert level at green normal throughout the entire event. If fresh magma was not moving, what set off nearly 9,000 earthquakes? The leading explanation centers on the volcano's hydrothermal system, the network of superheated water that circulates through fractured rock above the magma chamber, heated from below by the residual thermal energy of the underlying magmatic system. Mount Rainier's hydrothermal system is extensive. Hot water, driven upward by heat from the magma reservoir, percolates through cracks and pore spaces in the rock at depths of several kilometers. As conditions within that system change, whether through shifts in pressure, temperature, fluid volume, or the opening or closing of fluid pathways, localized stress changes can fracture rock and trigger swarms of small earthquakes. Scientists at the Cascades Volcano Observatory described the most likely cause as relatively minor changes in the hydrothermal system generating enough localized stress to break rock. The breaking of rock produces shaking. The shaking registers as an earthquake. No magma needs to move for this to happen. Water alone is sufficient. A comparable swarm occurred in 2009 when more than 1,000 earthquakes were recorded over 3 days beneath the summit. That event was also attributed to hydrothermal processes. The 2025 swarm was significantly larger in total event count, but followed a broadly similar pattern. Concentrated at similar depths, with similar waveform characteristics, and no accompanying changes in gas emissions or ground deformation, the USGS noted after the swarm subsided that the hydrothermal processes believed to have caused it may be continuing at levels too small to generate detectable seismicity, and that there remained a small chance of brief increases in seismic activity in the days to months ahead. If the earthquake swarm was not a sign of an impending eruption, why did it command national attention? Because Mount Rainier is not Mount St. Helens. Its danger does not come primarily from explosive eruptions. Its danger comes from what it is made of and what sits downstream. Mount Rainier stands 14,411 feet above sea level, the tallest peak in the Cascade Range. It carries more glacial ice than any other mountain in the contiguous United States. Roughly 35 square miles of permanent snow and ice draped across its flanks. And buried beneath that ice, large sections of the volcano's upper structure are composed of rock that has been chemically weakened by centuries of interaction with the hydrothermal system, the same system that generated the 2025 earthquake swarm. When hot, sulfur-rich volcanic gases encounter groundwater inside the mountain, they produce sulfuric acid. That acid attacks the surrounding rock, leaching out mineral components and replacing solid stone with soft, water-saturated clay. This process is called hydrothermal alteration, and it transforms what was once strong volcanic rock into material that is structurally weak, heavy with absorbed water, and prone to catastrophic failure. The danger is that large masses of this altered rock can collapse under their own weight, without any eruption needed to trigger them. A strong earthquake, a heavy rainfall event, a minor volcanic disturbance, or even simple gravitational loading over time can cause a section of the weakened flank to give way. When that happens, the collapsing mass mixes with the enormous volume of snow, ice, and groundwater on and inside the mountain, creating a lahar, a volcanic mudflow that behaves like liquid concrete, carrying boulders, trees, and everything else in its path as it surges down the river valleys at speeds of 45 to 50 miles per hour. Mount Rainier has produced more than 60 lahars in the past 10,000 years. Some of them traveled more than 100 kilometers from the summit, and the valleys they ran through are now home to hundreds of thousands of people. Approximately 5,600 years ago, Mount Rainier experienced the single most destructive lahar of the past 10,000 years. It is called the Osceola Mudflow. During a period of volcanic activity, a massive section of the volcano's summit and northeast flank collapsed. The material that failed was predominantly hydrothermally altered rock, weakened by the same acid-driven chemical processes still operating inside the mountain today. The collapse produced a debris volume of roughly 3.8 cubic kilometers. To put that in perspective, the entire 1,980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, one of the most dramatic volcanic events in American history, produced about 2.8 cubic kilometers of debris. The Osceola Mudflow was larger. As the collapsing rock mass incorporated water from the hydrothermal system and from melting glacial ice, it transformed within about 2 kilometers of the summit into a fully fluid lahar. It surged down the White River drainage at speeds exceeding 19 meters per second, filling the canyon to depths of more than 100 meters. It swept through what is now Enumclaw. It reached what is now Kent. It flowed all the way to Commencement Bay, where the port of Tacoma stands today, and extended into Puget Sound itself. The total area inundated exceeded 550 square kilometers. Subsurface deposits from the lahar have been identified across 157 square kilometers of the sound floor. The collapse created a horseshoe-shaped crater at the summit, roughly 1.8 kilometers wide, nearly identical in scale to the crater produced by the Mount St. Helens eruption. Most of that crater has since been filled in by subsequent lava flows, the most recent roughly 2,200 years ago. The landscape the Osceola Mudflow traveled through is now one of the most developed corridors in Washington state. Cities, highways, rail lines, schools, hospitals, and industrial infrastructure occupy the same river valleys that were scoured clean by a wall of volcanic mud less than 6 millennia ago. And the Osceola was not the last one. About 500 years ago, a section of Mount Rainier's western flank collapsed without any documented eruption. The resulting lahar, known as the electron mudflow, traveled down the Puyallup River Valley with enough force and volume to bury the flat lowland terrain for miles. The deposits from the electron mudflow form the valley floor that communities downstream the volcano are built on today. What makes the electron mudflow particularly significant is what it did not require. There is no geological evidence that it was triggered by an eruption, no associated tephra layer, no lava flow, no blast deposit. And the most widely accepted model is that a large mass of hydrothermally altered rock on the upper west flank simply failed, either under its own weight or in response to a seismic event, and the resulting debris mixed with snow, ice, and groundwater to produce a lahar that traveled tens of kilometers downstream. This is a scenario that keeps emergency managers awake at night. A lahar triggered by flank collapse does not need volcanic unrest to precede it. It does not need elevated gas emissions, ground deformation, or earthquake swarms that would trigger an elevated alert level. It can happen with no warning beyond whatever time the lahar itself takes to travel from the mountain to the populated valleys below. The USGS estimates that a lahar, originating high in the volcano and traveling down the Puyallup River Valley, would reach the town of Orting, population roughly 8,000, in approximately 30 to 45 minutes. Orting sits on a flat valley floor composed almost entirely of old lahar deposits. The town has an automated warning system, the Lahar detection system, that uses acoustic flow monitors positioned along the river to detect the ground vibrations produced by an incoming lahar and trigger sirens. The system is designed to give residents roughly 30 to 45 minutes to evacuate to high ground. That warning window is the entire margin between survival and catastrophe. There is no second line of defense. The USGS has mapped Mount Rainier's lahar hazard zones in detail. The picture is sobering. Approximately 78,000 residents live within the mapped lahar inundation zones across King, Lewis, Pierce, and Thurston counties. The same zones contain roughly 59,700 employees at nearly 3,900 businesses, generating $16 billion in annual sales. Tax parcels within the hazard zone carry a combined assessed value of $8.8 billion. Key road and rail corridors for the entire region run through these valleys. The port of Tacoma, one of the largest container ports on the west coast, sits at the downstream terminus of the Puyallup River, directly in the path that multiple historical lahars have followed. Dependent population facilities, schools, childcare centers, nursing homes, hotels, churches, police stations, and fire stations all sit within the mapped hazard zone. Some communities have a high number of residents in the zone, but a low percentage of their total population at risk. Others, like Orting, have the majority of their entire population inside the inundation area. The USGS has described Mount Rainier as a greater threat to life and property than Mount St. Paul's. Helens, despite erupting less frequently and less explosively in recent millennia, specifically because of the proximity of large population centers in Lahar, susceptible valley, the volcano does not need to produce a dramatic eruption to cause mass casualties. It needs only to shed a section of its weakened upper flank into the river systems that flow through the most densely developed parts of the Puget Sound lowland. This is where the 2025 earthquake swarm connects to the larger hazard picture. The swarm was caused by changes in Mount Rainier's hydrothermal system. The hydrothermal system is the same mechanism that is actively weakening the rock inside the volcano and creating the conditions for future flank collapse. Every cycle of heated, acidic water circulating through fractures in the upper edifice converts more solid rock into soft, water-saturated clay. That process has been running continuously for thousands of years. It was responsible for weakening the rock that failed in the Osceola mudflow 5,600 years ago. It was responsible for weakening the rock that failed in the electron mudflow 500 years ago, and it is continuing right now beneath the glacial ice and the summit craters. In the same zone where nearly 9,000 earthquakes fired in rapid succession last summer, the earthquake swarm did not mean the mountain was about to collapse, but it confirmed that the hydrothermal system at the Conomus, the core of the volcano, remains active, dynamic, and capable of producing measurable changes in the stress field of the surrounding rock. That is not a crisis. It is a reminder that the process converting Mount Rainier from a stable mountain into an increasingly unstable one has not paused. It is ongoing. The same hot water that fractured enough rock to generate the largest earthquake swarm ever recorded at the volcano is simultaneously altering the chemistry and structural integrity of the rock it flows through. Every year that process continues, the volume of weakened material inside the mountain grows. 4 months after the swarm ended, a tabloid article claimed Mount Rainier had entered an unprecedented 72-hour tremor phase and that an eruption was imminent. The story went viral. It was based on readings from a single seismic station high on the mountain called STAR. One of the last remaining old analog instruments in the network, the signal looked alarming on a seismogram. A near-solid black stripe suggesting constant, intense ground motion. The Pacific Northwest Seismic Network investigated immediately and determined the signal was radio interference, most likely caused by rime ice buildup on the station's antenna. The STAR station uses very low-power radio transmission to send data, and the old analog system is particularly susceptible to weather-related interference. None of the hundreds of other instruments positioned around the mountain showed any similar activity. If real volcanic tremor had been occurring, it would have appeared simultaneously across multiple stations. It did not. There was no tremor, no increase in volcanic earthquakes, no ground swelling, no change in alert level. The USGS and PNSN debunked the story within hours, but the viral spread of the false report illustrated a real vulnerability. Mount Rainier occupies a unique position in public consciousness. It looms over the Seattle-Tacoma metropolitan area, visible on clear days from virtually every neighborhood. Nearly 4 million people live within sight of it. The memory of Mount St. Helens in 1980 colors how the public interprets any news about Cascade volcanoes. When misinformation about Rainier circulates, it reaches millions of people almost instantly, and the correction almost never travels as far or as fast as the original claim. The USGS Cascades Volcano Observatory monitors Mount Rainier around the clock. The monitoring network includes broadband and short-period seismometers, continuous GPS stations, tilt meters, gas measurement instruments, and webcams. Data flows continuously to analysis centers where automated detection algorithms flag anomalies for human review. Scientists have identified the specific signals that would indicate a genuine escalation toward eruptive activity, a sustained increase in earthquake rates, particularly earthquakes migrating to shallower depths over time, elevated sulfur dioxide emissions, indicating fresh magma degassing as it approaches the surface, measurable ground deformation, inflation or tilting that indicates magma accumulating in a shallow reservoir, changes in hydrothermal vent temperatures or steam output that exceed historical variability. None of these signals were present during the 2025 swarm. None have appeared since. Mount Rainier's alert level remains at normal. Its aviation color code remains green. The volcano is not showing any signs of approaching eruption, but the monitoring exists precisely because the transition from quiet to dangerous can be rapid, and because the most catastrophic hazard with this volcano poses, Lahar, from flank collapse, may provide less warning than any other volcanic hazard in the Cascades. The Lahar detection system along the river valleys is the last line of real-time defense. It works by detecting the acoustic signal of an approaching flow, not by predicting it in advance. By the time the sirens sound, the Lahar is already moving. Everything before that moment, every seismometer, every GPS station, every gas sensor, every helicopter survey exists to give scientists and emergency managers any possible advance notice that the mountain's behavior is changing in ways that might precede a collapse. The 2025 swarm was a change. It was not the dangerous kind, but it proved the monitoring system works, proved the scientific teams can mobilize rapidly, and proved that distinguishing a genuine hazard signal from background volcanic noise is something that requires constant vigilance. Mount Rainier last erupted roughly 1,000 years ago. Its last truly significant eruptive period ended about 2,200 years ago. By volcanic standards, it has been quiet for a very long time. But quiet at Mount Rainier does not mean safe. It means the hydrothermal system has had centuries of uninterrupted time to weaken the rock inside the volcano. It means glaciers have continued to load the upper flanks with billions of tons of ice. It means the river valleys downstream have filled with homes, businesses, schools, and infrastructure that did not exist the last time the mountain shed a piece of itself. The 2025 earthquake swarm was not a warning, it was a window, a brief, clear look at the processes operating inside a volcano that most people see only as a beautiful, snow-covered peak on the horizon. Nearly 9,000 earthquakes, and not a single one was felt at the surface. That is the nature of the change scientists are tracking beneath Mount Rainier. It is subtle, it is persistent, it is invisible to everyone who is not specifically looking for it. And it is reshaping the interior of the most dangerous volcano in the country, one fracture at a time.